Welcome back to Movie Recap. Today I'm gonna show you a 2019 Russian-Serbian action film called The Balkan Line. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie begins in the land of Bosnia and Herzegovina, wherein the sniper, Shadia, attempts to kill the enemy when suddenly she gets hit through the left shoulder, failing to shoot the target as she runs away from the shooting affray. Afterward, she radios the commander to report getting hit, but then, Shadia suddenly stops and injects herself morphine. On the other hand, Slash receives a command through his radio to take the target alive and breathing, while Sura is getting informed about concealing once Slash grabs Harun. However, Slash misses Harun after trying to kill him by beating his face. Slash only stops when Sura grabs him from behind to remind him that they need to get Harun alive. Unfortunately, Sura eventually gets killed by Harun while frustratedly talking with Slash. And before Harun takes his next step to end Slash's life, Jerry suddenly appears, and beats his head using the rifle. On the other hand, Slash radios the commander for emergency evacuation as Sura is almost losing a lot of blood. Meanwhile, Bara leads the next mission as he takes the call from the commander to get ready. Afterward, he rolls down through the rocks as he successfully takes the remote, and activates the explosion bombs in the forest. Fortunately, the team accomplishes its mission by taking Harun alive. However, Jerry convinces the group that Sura will not get alive due to losing much blood as they take the military helicopter on the way to their base. Upon watching Sura dies, Slash eventually attempts to kill Harun for killing his brother-in-law. Yet, Deputy Chief of Intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel Aslan Bekhoev, clarifies that Harun is under the protection of NATO forces, and there's a warrant not to kill him. Frustrated, Jerry finally talks, saying that once they kill Harun, they will go to a military court because they are still subordinate to NATO. However, the former paratrooper turned mercenary, Andrei Shatilov, refuses to agree with Jerryev, and immediately grabs Harun's collar, and pushes him off the helicopter. Later, Beck receives a discretion of the officer's title, non-execution, failure of the assignment, and threat to the international relations of the RF, to lay down the soldiers. Unfortunately, these soldiers are Andrei Shatilov, Oleg Barman, Vera Kurbeva, Ilya Slashchev, and Rustam Baba Jerryev of the ranks of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. However, he also gets a declaration of incomplete official compliance from the NATO forces. However, despite signing the Dayton Accords to end the war in Bosnia in 1995, the peace in the Balkans failed to last longer. A new conflict arose in the region in 1998 as the Kosovo Albanians wanted independence. Because of that, it suppresses the actions of the Kosovo Liberation Army, which the UN recognizes as a terrorist organization, the regular Serbian troops sent in Kosovo. Then, in 1999, NATO started bombing Yugoslavia to end the conflict even without the consent of the UN Security Council. Later, the bombing starts in the land of Kosovo, Yugoslavia. Yet, the young couple still makes it through to the hospital to give birth when suddenly the place explodes after Toshka enters with her doctor named Jasna Blagojevic. Panicking, Stefan enters the hospital, and finds Toshka, now dead after giving birth to their baby. Afterward, Jasna appears and takes the baby with him when suddenly, Stefan gets killed by a flare-up inside. Jasna immediately runs as she sees the ceiling crack due to the explosion. Because of that, the bombing is getting all over the news as the Russian president has joined forces with NATO partners against the Serbian armed forces led by the Albanian warlord, Smuk. A while later, General Somov meets with Beck, saying that the Serbs will respond to them, but once their army comes out of Kosovo, the real power in the region will pass into the hands of Albanian rebels led by a terrorist named Smuk, the warlord. While listening, Somov says that the NATO troops will stop the bombing and come as peacekeepers. However, Beck receives a secret mission from him about the large airport in Kosovo, the Pristina, in control of the British responsibility sector, and only transport planes can land there. Technically, Beck will borrow the airport, and keep it under control until the dealers arrive. Beck then receives military equipment to be sent to Bosnia for NATO troops. Leaving him no choice, Beck takes Shatilov's band to help him despite not trusting Shatilov. On the other hand, Jasna gives a resignation letter to her boss, Amir, saying that she cannot continue anymore after what happened to the hospital. However, Amir refuses to accept it, saying that it's better to save a life than nothing to do. Meanwhile, Beck starts driving on the way to the airport when suddenly he sees Girev joining the protest on the bridge. So, Beck calls Girev, and orders him to join his group at the airport. On the other hand, Dr. Colonel Ladov of the Russian airborne troop talks with Somov using the satellite connection. While speaking, Somov informs him that the decision to jump in Pristina is well established as he also gives him the task to get the airport ahead of the Allies, and prevent information leakage to NATO. However, the police officers are having an operation to capture the Slatina airfield after the Albanian warlord, Smuk, takes it during the bombing in Yugoslavia. Afterward, Commander Milik takes Shatilov, covering his actual name by using another name, Rade, near Smuk's base. Fortunately, Rade accepts Milik's request by telling him everything about his reason for visiting Yugoslavia. While talking, Milik says that once his troops withdraw, there will be complete lawlessness, so he needs Rade to take down the terrorists. However, Rade excuses that their problem is unsolvable without outside help. Meanwhile, Bek gradually visits his last team, including Shatilov, to join his troop. Milik calls his troop to rescue the Albanian families after leaving the village later. Afterward, Milik drives their way to the road to save the families as the Albanian neighbors warn them that the bandits will rob them. Upon arriving, Vic refuses to listen to Fadil, and gets out of the vehicle, reloading his weapon to shoot the bandits. Luckily, Rade saves Vic from getting sniped by killing the sniper using his dagger. However, one bandit escapes while the others are successfully killed by Rade, saving the families from getting robbed inside the bus. Afterward, military Milik gives Rade a passport after successfully taking his job to kill. Meanwhile, Bek successfully unites the team once again in the abandoned house. Afterward, he drops his bag on the table while telling them that it's time to make their decisions without NATO. On the other hand, Rade accidentally meets Yasna at the terminal bus, and luckily rides with her. However, the bus they're taking gets ambushed by the bandits. Afterward, Smuk makes his speech, ordering the passengers, including the driver, to undergo a screening procedure as he acclaims that they are entering their territory of the Republic of Kosovo. Once resistance occurs, Smuk will order his men to punish them mercilessly. Unfortunately, Yasna almost gets harassed after attacking Smuk, who mercilessly shoots the passengers' heads on the road. Luckily, Rade immediately makes his move after pretending that he passes out upon getting beaten by a gun on his head. Rade then kills some bandits while ordering Smuk to tell his men to throw their weapons off. Afterward, Rade and Yasna help the passengers by riding the bus on the way to a Glogauas hospital to escape from Smuk. Then, after taking the passengers to the hospital, Yasna favors coming with Rade to deliver the priest's corpse to his churchmates. Eventually, Rade falls in love with Yasna, and offers her to stay at his house while taking her duty at the hospital. On the other hand, Smuk goes to the village to ask Milik about Rade's whereabouts. However, Milik refuses to tell the truth despite getting tormented by Smuk's men. Because of that, Smuk sentences him to death by shooting his heart. Meanwhile, Rade receives news from Fadil that Smuk killed Milik. But little does he know, Smuk is already going to Glogauas hospital to capture Yasna. Afterward, blackmails Yasna by slicing the woman's neck to tell the location of Rade. Leaving her no choice, Yasna reveals the truth as Smuk orders to kill all the victims on their prisoner's base except for her. Luckily, the young little girl named Devojsika successfully hides at the hospital trolley. Later, Bek begins their plan by telling them they need to take over the airport in Slatina, and hold their positions until the peacekeepers come. Also, his team marks an essential strategy, which they need to take the airport without anyone knowing. Since there are a lot of Serbs who guard it, Barry and Bek will be the dispatchers for negotiating, then Jerry and Slash are anointed to get the hangars and checkpoints. Lastly, Vera will take the terminal using her sniping skills. Meanwhile, President Slobodan Milosevic has signed an agreement to withdraw the Allied troops of Yugoslavia from Kosovo, so the management of the war's end is going to NATO. Leaving them no choice, the Russian airborne troop accepts the task to take control of a strategically important site, Slatina Airport, before the arrival of the NATO Armored Brigade. Dr. Colonel Lodov then signals his troop to drive their way to the airport. Later, Jerry and Slash finally arrive at the airport when suddenly they see suspicious things inside, so Slash immediately reports it to Bek. On the other hand, Rade officially takes his call to move to Smuk's base with his 2 men to save Yasna. Little does he know, Jerry, Vera, and Slash are also there, so Rade's men attack without them knowing. Because of that, Rade meets his team again, and reveals why he plans to attack Smuk's base. Afterward, Vera reports about the arrival of a pickup machine, assuming that they are an enemy. After a while, Bek's team tells Shatilov to get involved with his mission to recapture the airfield from Smuk. Suddenly, Shatilov and the team see a lot of dead bodies upon entering the camp. Luckily, Shatilov sees Yasna hiding behind the desk, and later on, she admits her fault of telling Shatilov's whereabouts to Smuk. On the other hand, Smuk receives a report from one of his men that Bek conquers their base. Meanwhile, Bek immediately reports to Somov that Smuk's base has 100 people while he has only 8, pointing out that they can't handle taking them all down while waiting for the Russian airborne troops' arrival. Yet, Somov sticks with his order to hold the airport until morning, and disappear once the troops arrive. Afterward, Bek fathers his team to tell their next task. Then, he orders Shatilov to take responsibility once the Serbs, which is Vic and Fadil, remain. Technically, Shatilov will deliver Bek's message only to follow his orders. However, Vera takes Fadil on her command. Afterward, Bek shares his idea to Shatilov about preparing fireplaces and deploying weapons from the hangar throughout the territory. However, they are lack cartridges, so they need to save. After hearing his ideas, Shatilov favors letting Fadil take the roof with Vera. After their discussion, the team starts doing their assignments at the airfield. Afterward, Yasna walks toward Shatilov to give him morphine when suddenly Shatilov tells her that she will sit with Bek in the dispatch center, which is the safest area to protect themselves once the battle begins. Shatilov then gives her a gun for protection, and reveals his actual name. Meanwhile, Slash approaches Shatilov, thanking him for throwing Harun off the helicopter to give justice to his brother-in-law's death on the battlefield. Afterward, the team prays and kneels to keep themselves alive in the battle. However, upon waiting, Smook and his men finally arrive at the airfield, so the team immediately gets ready for their weapons. Afterward, Bek orders Barya, Jerry, and the Serbs to hold the terminal after successfully igniting firecrackers through the sky. While Slash and Shadi, on the other hand, will keep the field. Then, for the last, Vera is ordered to hide the team using her sniper skills. A while later, Bara finally activates the landmine while Fadil and Vic finish the column to kill Smook's men at the airfield. Afterward, Bara throws a grenade while Smook signals his men to attack. Little does Smook know, Bek's team puts a trap on the field, wherein anyone who dares to walk on it will explode. On the other hand, Smook takes out the second group to attack as his last weapon against Bek's team while he leaves, and goes to the terminal for invasion. However, Fadil gets shot by one bandit after firing Smook's vehicle. Unfortunately, the terminal is getting attacked by Smook's second group, so Jerry and Vic fire them, while Shatilov, Vera, and Slash shoot in the direction of the road. Meanwhile, Jerry injects a severely injured Fadil with some morphine while Bara activates the explosion bombs inside the camp to kill the incoming bandits. Suddenly, they hear incoming bombs from the bandits, attempting to slaughter them all in their area. Unfortunately, Jerry gets killed due to an incendiary fire, Fadil's leg gets hit by artillery shells, and Vera injures herself from Smook's rocket warheads. Meanwhile, Somov receives a message from the president to run after the column from Kosovo gets suspended. However, Somov refuses to take the order, saying the queue will get to the airport. Afterward, Somov calls Lodov to stop him from going to the airport, and wait for further instructions. Leaving him no choice, Lodov calls the attention of everyone to control the movement. But then, Lodov receives a report from his Solider that Slatina Airport is beyond the pass. Because of that, the Russian airborne troop proceed with the movement on the way to the airfield. After a while, Slash takes the truck to attack Smook's bandits, sacrificing himself to save the weakling team. While Slash is driving, Bek tries covering him by shooting from afar when suddenly Slash gets killed by the bandits while his truck explodes, killing the remaining enemies at the airfield. Afterward, Fadil volunteers to shoot the remaining group when suddenly Smook catches Shatilov running at the airport. Unfortunately, Shatilov gets hit, so Bara takes the artillery shells to hit Smook from afar. Meanwhile, Yasna tries saving Shatilov at the airfield while Smook and the remaining bandits are walking on their way to their area. Because of that, Shatilov gets killed for saving Yasna. Afterward, Bek takes the vehicle to get his team inside for withdrawal, but Smook and his team immediately shoot to prevent them from escaping. The movie ends with Bek, Bara, Vera, Yasna, and the young girl almost surrendering themselves to Smook and his team, when suddenly, the Russian airborne troop reinforcement arrives. On the other hand, Vic eventually stabs the neck of the escaping Smook on his vehicle, giving his brother, Fadil, justice for mercilessly slicing his head. Afterward, Bek's team disappears while Yasna and the young girl get saved by Lodov without knowing the mission happened at the airport. Luckily, Bek's team gets themselves out before the Russian troops and NATO almost start another battle at the airfield. Then, a year later, Shatilov, whom Yasna thought was dead, suddenly survived his injury and visited her. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this to help the channel out. Have a nice day.